Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this webinar, Surrogacy and Egg Donation in the United States, specifically for French intended parents. My name is Juan Tecles, and I am the European Director for CT Fertility. I would like to introduce you to our speakers tonight in order of appearance. We would have from CT Fertility the Medical Director, Dr. Mel Thornton. We will also have our fertility specialist, Dr. Joao De Pino. After that, we will have the Patient Relations Manager of a surrogacy agency based in Chicago, Conceivabilities. And finally, we will have Clélia Richard, who is an attorney specialized in family law and based in Paris. So I would like to start with this presentation with the first speaker. And for that, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Melvin Thornton. Thank you, Dr. Thornton.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start off by saying this is an exciting journey that you're all about to venture onto. And I'm here today to give you some information about the medical process and to alleviate a lot of your fears, because I'm sure a lot of you are nervous about the process. So I want to walk you through it so you have a really good understanding of what we do, particularly with the IVF part of it. So the first thing is, who are we, CT Fertility? We're CT Fertility, we're a full-service IVF laboratory. We have offices in Trumbull, Connecticut, New York City, Manhattan, as well as Barcelona. Our main IVF center is located in Trumbull, Connecticut, which is about 1 hour and 20 minutes from New York City. In New York City, we do have consultation offices, as well as in Barcelona with Juan. And this is our lovely staff here that we have and some of the beautiful children that we have. I just always like to show this picture so you get a chance to see our staff. So when you come to visit us here in Connecticut, you'll get an idea of who people are. So today, this evening, what we're going to talk about is my focus will be on the IVF clinic. When you're looking at a surrogacy journey, is a partnership between the IVF clinic as well as the surrogacy agency, which you'll hear more about from Stephanie. With the IVF clinic, what we do is that we help you create your embryos, we help you find your egg donor, and we help you screen your gestational carrier medically, and we're the ones that do the procedure for the embryo transfer. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through a couple things that are really important, and then at the end, talk about the overall process with you. So at CT Fertility, first thing we are known for is that we have a very large egg donor database or egg bank. We have over 200 donors in our egg bank. About 150 to 180 donors are currently active, and every day we're recruiting new donors to add to our database. We have different types of egg donors. We have anonymous egg donors, and these are egg donors that you'll know everything about, but they won't know anything about you, so they're completely anonymous. And then we have what we call known or directed egg donors, and these are egg donors where you both will share information about each other and have to go through a contract. What's unique about CT Fertility is that in addition to our fresh eggs, we also have frozen eggs at our disposal. So if someone's interested in using frozen eggs, we do have frozen eggs in our database. And then the other thing about our anonymous egg donors is that we have a lot of them, even though they're still anonymous, they're willing to meet you via Skype, a phone call, or meet you on the day of the egg retrieval. So a lot of questions that come up is, well, how do we screen our egg donors? And at CT Fertility, our egg donors are screened thoroughly before they even go into our database. And the advantage of that is if you choose an egg donor, she's ready to cycle at any time because all of her screening testing has been done. And when you have access to our database, you're going to have full access to the database, which you'll see the full profiles. You'll see pictures of current adult pictures as well as baby pictures, as well as likes and interests on the profile. Our egg donors are thoroughly screened. They undergo genetic testing. With the genetic testing, they undergo the latest technology for genetic testing. They also undergo infectious disease screening, as well as what we call ovarian reserve testing to make sure they have a healthy amount of eggs and will be a good egg donor for you. When we're looking at the qualifications of an egg donor, besides making sure her family history is appropriate, besides making sure she has a normal physical examination and past medical history, we want to make sure she has enough eggs that will allow you to be successful, because the most important part of the journey when you're using the egg donor is making sure you choose the right or proper egg donor. So what we want to make sure that a young, healthy woman should have good quality eggs, but we also want to make sure that she has a very healthy reserve of eggs. So we screen her with some baseline hormone tests as well as an ultrasound. And what you can see from the picture on your screen is that the gray area with the black circles is an ovary, and we like to see as many of the black circles or follicles as we can. That means that she has a very healthy reserve of eggs. So if we look at the criteria that we use for our egg donors, they're thoroughly screened. All of our egg donors are typically under the age of 30. Most of our egg donors average about age 24, 25. They have a normal BMI. We have to make sure they don't smoke, because smoking can't interfere with your quality of your eggs. We also make sure they have a negative drug screen, a normal infectious disease screening, as well as a genetic testing. Now, what about the gestational carriers, or what we call egg donor recipients? For gestational carriers or recipients, they're screened medically. We take a very thorough medical history. We make sure there's no surgical history that can interfere with the embryo implanting. We also do a laboratory testing for infectious disease screening, as well as laboratory testing to make sure they're not smokers, and a drug test as well. The most important test that we look at is to make sure that the uterus is nice and healthy, and we do what's called a saline sonogram. So what you'll notice on the screen, you'll see a picture. Everything on ultrasound is gray, so I'll keep saying gray, so I apologize for that, but you'll see there's a gray structure in the center. But right in the middle, there's going to be a black area. So what happens is the saline sonogram, we put water into the uterus, which allows us to see inside the cavity of the uterus to make sure a woman does not have anything that can preclude the embryo from implanting, such as a fibroid or a uterine polyp. So now if you see this picture, what you'll see is that the cavity is nice and normal because it's all black. But when someone has an abnormality, you can see very obviously that they do have a gray structure on the inside of the black, and that is someone that has a small endometrial polyp. So in this case, if she was a surrogate or she was a recipient of donor eggs, we would recommend that she have this polyp removed before she proceeds through with the treatment. Next, we want to focus on the male. And for the male, it's important to always have an initial semen analysis to make sure the male has enough sperm for us to work with. The other things that we do as far as testing, we do infectious disease screening, and we also do genetic testing as well. Now, here at CT Fertility, when someone is overseas, we like for the male to come visit our clinic one time. And during that one visit, we would do a semen analysis, and we do what's called a sperm freeze. And when you're working with a gestational carrier, the FDA requires us to do special testing. So all that is done one time here in our office, and typically with a nice healthy sperm count, a gentleman is able to freeze about 3 to 4 vials of sperm, so we'll have enough sperm for the procedure. This gives us the advantage that you would only have to come to the clinic one time to produce sperm, and you would not have to come back for the procedure. We would use the frozen egg, the frozen sperm, with the eggs that are retrieved from the egg donor. And the most important thing to remember is that frozen and fresh sperm are just as successful. So that's why it's easier as far as synchronizing the cycle logistically to use frozen sperm. What I'd like to do is walk you through the typical process involving an egg donor as well as a surrogate or a recipient of the egg donor eggs. So there's a two process. And what you'll notice is that we have to, when we're doing a fresh cycle, what we have to do is that we have to synchronize the egg donor and synchronize the recipient so that her uterus is prepared to receive the embryos. So what you're going to see on your screen on the left is a picture of an ovary. And now those little black circles that you see are what we call multiple follicles or eggs. So we give the egg donor medication to stimulate her ovaries to make multiple eggs. And for a good egg donor, we like to see at least 15 to 20 eggs. And at the same time, we're preparing the recipient or the surrogate with hormones that will prepare the lining of the uterus for the embryos to implant. So once the eggs are retrieved, what you'll see in the center of your screen and the picture, that is an egg. And in nature, you require lots of sperm to get one egg to fertilize. And human reproduction is very inefficient in that if we let nature take its course and try to get that egg to fertilize on a natural basis, the fertilization rates are subpar at 50%. What we do here at CT Fertility and what we see throughout the country here in the United States is that we do a procedure called intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI, ICSI. And what that means is that we take one individual healthy sperm and inject that sperm directly into the egg to assure that the egg sees the sperm. And by doing this procedure, our fertilization rates here at CT Fertility are about 80 to 85%, much more efficient than what you get in letting nature take its course. So now, once we have these eggs to fertilize, oftentimes we'll have same-sex couples where we have two couples where both want to be dads. We'll take the mature eggs, as you see in the slide here. There are 20 eggs that are mature. And if we have same-sex couples where we're doing a 50-50 sperm split, we'll take 10 eggs for one partner and 10 eggs for the other partner and inject those with the sperm. And then we let them develop in the laboratory. So in this slide, what you'll see is that we see how many of the eggs fertilize, and then we let them develop in our laboratory, and we observe them on the third day to make sure the embryos are developing properly. And here at CT Fertility, we want to make sure we develop the healthiest embryo that gives you the best chance of implantation. So we let all the embryos grow to the stage is called a blastocyst. And the blastocyst is the embryo that you'll see on your screen. Is the embryos develop into what we call the inner cell mass, which is the part that becomes the baby. And then the other cells at the bottom become the trophectoderm, which are the cells that develop into the placenta. So these are embryos that have now reached a stage where they can potentially implant. So what we do is that we grade these individual embryos, and what you'll see in the picture, you'll see grading where A's and B's. And here at CT Fertility, we only freeze embryos that are excellent quality, A quality, or B quality, which can lead to a baby. Now, once these embryos are developed, and if we're going to be doing a fresh transfer, the fresh transfer involves taking a small catheter into the uterus and transferring one or two embryos, which we'll discuss in 1 second. And we use ultrasound guidance to make sure that the catheter is in the correct position, and also to make sure that the embryos are placed in the proper position for implantation. After the transfer, approximately 10 to 12 days later, we do our first pregnancy test to confirm that the embryos have implanted. Here at CT Fertility, we also have cycles where we have a full cycle or something called a split donor cycle. And with a split donor cycle, what happens is that we have two couples that are splitting the actual eggs of the cycle. So you're splitting the cost of the cycle. So in this example here, what you'll see is that if there are 30 eggs that are retrieved, one couple will get 15 eggs, the other couple get 15 eggs to give them the best chance of having a child, but also making the package affordable for couples looking to start off on the journey where are cost conscious. So what we do is that we split the number of eggs that are retrieved. It lowers the cost. Who's the best candidate for? People who are single sperm sources are the best candidates for split egg cycles. If you're a same-sex couple and you're looking to have both of you be genetic fathers, in those cases we recommend you do a full donor egg cycle. So the big question here becomes, how many embryos do we transfer? And here in the U.S. has been a big push for what we call single embryo transfers, because we're concerned about the risk of a twin pregnancy. And by doing a single embryo transfer, particularly when we do a procedure called pre-implantation genetic screening, we're able to select out the healthiest embryo. It allows us now to have good selection so that we can transfer one embryo and reduce the risk of twins and not compromise your overall success rates. So why are we concerned about twins and multiple gestation? Because there's a risk for the surrogate mother or the recipient, as well as a risk for the embryos themselves. For the surrogate mother, we worry about the risk of hypertension in the pregnancy, diabetes, as well as some bleeding issues that can occur. And as far as the pregnancy goes, there's a higher risk of miscarriage, as well as a higher risk of preterm labor and preterm delivery, which can lead to complications for the babies. So what you're going to see here, this is what we call our National Summary Data, or SART data. And this is comparing transferring one embryo compared to two. And what you see is in the green, the success rates overall are the same if we transfer one versus two, particularly if we're using a young, healthy egg donor and a gestational carrier surrogate. The difference between transferring one and two is that you'll see in the blue on the right-hand side is that the risk of twins is about 33% overall. And when you look at the risk of twins, what you'll see is that twins do deliver earlier. And on the right-hand screen on the slide, you'll see that the risk of premature delivery is about 18% for twins, compared to about 8% for a singleton that you'll see on the left-hand part of the slide. So that takes us to the concept of fresh versus frozen. And I have my partner here, Dr. João de Pinho, who is an expert in surrogacy. He would now like to talk to you about fresh versus frozen embryos and some other aspects of your treatment.
Hi, everyone. It's difficult to understand what type of cycle, if you're thinking preemptively that everything that is fresh and untouched and not motivated to interfere or be interfered by the human, it might be better. That might have been a good concept maybe 20 years ago, but things have changed radically. The freezing method is much, much better, much more accurate. We do a very fast freezing that we didn't do before. And in comparison actually to the rates that we had maybe 10 or 15 years ago, fresh is indeed something that we are going away from, and frozen is something that we are embracing much more. It increases implantation rates. The ongoing pregnancy rates is not only we are trying to achieve a pregnancy, we're trying to achieve live birth, means a baby that is born. Also important is that we lower the risk for the gestational carrier, and having the number of miscarriages that can be actually increased in one versus the other. Also lower the preterm and complications during pregnancy, like prematurity, means the baby being born a little bit before time. That results in healthy babies in the very end of this journey that you're going to seek out. More than that, there is also, let me see if I can go back just one. Also importantly is there's two parts that are very, very important to synchronize. One is the gestational carrier, which is going to embrace that pregnancy that is going to be provided and resulting from that donor cycle. We chose the donor, we have a source of sperm, and things can be slightly not synchronized because the same time that we would be expecting for the donor has a variation. Nature has a variation. All of us are different in that case. And also the amount of time to make that fluffy endometrium prepared at the optimal time for the transfer can also be different from woman to woman and even from cycle to cycle. It's important for us to understand that also the frozen gives us an advantage for us to be able to do genetic screening. And that's something that I think it's going to be more important, because we are able to change the way that we actually visualize the optimal embryo that we are going to choose. We know that embryos depend on their quality, not only on the donor's age, but also on part of the sperm quality. And we know that there is a line that is a baseline where there is already a chromosomal alterations that happen per nature. Now, genetic screening comes and changes that factor, where we can see the ones that would not go in have an implantation or decrease the implantation rate, the ones would have a chromosomal problem with them, and of course, consecutively would increase also the abortion or miscarriage rate on these patients. Signifies that right now, safely, between day 5 and day 6 of development of that embryo, you can take a few number of cells, just 3-4 cells, and safely, they're only from the placenta. We know perfectly well at this time where baby is, and we're not going to touch the baby. We get not only the notion of the number of chromosomes called karyotype, which we can visualize for the most common things like Down syndrome, the trisomy 21 that we well know in Europe, but we also can take a look at each one of those individual chromosomes and see the amount of DNA that they actually have there, something that was not possible a few years back. And this is what we call next generation sequencing. We can actually know from each chromosome, as you can see there in a linear form, the amount that would be expected for each one of them. But if you take a look at the representation now that we have there, is that there is a problem with one of those chromosomes, which looks a little bit below, means you might have lost that information to another chromosome, or even lower than that, and more to the right-hand corner, as you can see, there's other chromosomes that might have acquired information. And it's important because these are babies that probably will have already an alteration that many times cannot only be picked up by the karyotype, but just by counting the number of chromosomes. So pre-implantation genetic screening is available readily. It kind of gives the selection of the best one to transfer, reducing the number of transfers that we actually are going to do, and increasing also the success in a process that if you're going to go through a surrogacy journey, it is a very emotional process, a very costly process, and a very time-consuming process. And this will actually obviate a lot of the failures and increase the success that we have. So it also decreases what your fear might be of certain diseases that we can now already screen at this stage early in pregnancy, and reduces basically the cost of the additional number of transfers that we would be doing. That allows us also one very important thing: offer safely, with success, that single embryo transfer that is so very important to reduce also the risks of twins that can have more complications if that is an option by the intended parents. And it allows to balance this desire between, a safe pregnancy and a successful one. PTS also, lastly, just to talk about a lot of innovation, and every single day new things happen. And so exciting is, for example, the fact that now we can count on those 3 or 4 cells. We can actually count individually the number of mitochondria that exist in them. It's just a reflection of our efficacious. I'm closer to my 50s. Probably my cells have a lot of mitochondria because it's the energy producing little bit of each one of my cells. Means that a younger person will have less of those mitochondria. And same thing in embryos. The ones that have less mitochondria will actually be more efficacious. I think we gave a perspective, Dr. Mel and I, about this. If you have any questions in the end, please, either in English or in French, please feel free to ask.
And the one thing that's important is Dr. DePino is fluent in French. So any questions that you feel comfortable in French, he is your doctor to make your appointment with.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. DePino and Dr. Thornton. Yes, I would like to remind also to the audience something I forgot to say earlier, that we can make some questions directly to any of the speakers, but please keep these questions for right at the end when all speakers have finished their presentations. Then you can write those questions in the chat channel, in the chat box, and then I will give the floor to the relevant speaker to answer those questions. Thank you very much. Now, without further delay, we have Stephanie Foyley of Conceivabilities. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for taking the time to meet with us this evening. I'm from Conceivabilities, and I'd like to talk to you about our program and how we can help. Conceivabilities has been helping families with assisted reproduction now since 1996. Surrogacy in the U.S. must seem very overwhelming to consider at this point. We are here. We know what it takes to help you build your family through assisted reproduction. First, you want to consider an agency that is professional and proven. You need a team of experts when you are considering a gestational carrier journey here in the U.S. We are experts in family creation. Since 1996, we have helped families from all over the world, every continent now except for Antarctica. Over the past 2 decades, we have perfected the processes involved. It is a multidisciplined team approach here at Conceivabilities. We have professionals from the healthcare field, the mental health field, the business and legal fields to assist you as you go on this journey. We are considered the gold standard when it comes to gestational carrier programming. Our proven professional approach is unparalleled in the industry. As I mentioned, it is a multidisciplined team approach. There's no other agency in the world that has our depth and breadth of professional experience. Our proprietary matching process has been trademarked. It is called Matching Matters. It is a unique process that includes our proprietary screening process for potential gestational carrier candidates, as well as an individualized strategy that is unique to every single family. Our process starts with our signature pre-screening method for gestational carrier candidates. Our surrogates are pre-screened for both health, mental and physically being fit for this challenge, and making sure they're doing this for the right reasons. Less than 1% of the candidates that apply to our program are to become Conceivabilities gestational carriers. It is the most thorough and vigorous screening in the industry. And as I mentioned, less than 1% of those candidates will meet our strict criteria. It is also the timeliness of this screening process. We fully complete our signature screening process before we ever present a candidate for your family to consider partnering with. This process saves you time, money, and an emotional investment as you go through the process. We make sure that we find the candidates that are doing this for the right reasons. This is a big differential between us and other agencies. We invest heavily in the vetting process as well as the mental health screenings necessary to make sure we find candidates that are doing this for the right reasons. We invite you to call us or contact us via our email address to schedule a personal consultation when you're ready. Surrogacy in the United States may seem very complicated, but with a proven professional agency partner, we can guide you and help simplify this process every step of the way. So I look forward to meeting you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephanie. Now we're trying to connect Clélia Richard, who is the attorney based in Paris. I would like to ask you to give me one moment because we're having a technical difficulty with Clélia's connection, and is being resolved at the moment. I don't know if in the meantime I can ask the participants if they have any questions for Stephanie, who just spoke, or for any of the doctors, and we can answer some of those questions while we get Clélia connected onto the webinar. Yes, I can see Isabel is saying that she's clear with everything. I wonder if any of the other participants has any question for the doctors or for Stephanie regarding surrogacy, egg donation, embryo creation. Okay, so I have a question here from Nadesh. Okay, so to give the sperm sample, I understand that's what she means. How many days they need to stay in the USA, including the medical examinations that they will be needed upon arrival in the USA. I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Thornton or Dr. DePina to answer this. Thank you very much.
The question, how many days do you need to stay? And I'm going to answer that question two ways. Medically, your visit to the clinic here at CT Fertility is a few hours. So you only need 1 day to complete your medical testing. But the most important thing to remember about CT Fertility, we're an hour and 20 minutes away from New York City. So how many days you want to stay in the city is entirely up to you. If it were me doing this and I was going to Paris, maybe I'll stay there for 4 or 5 days. But medically, you only need one visit to the clinic, so 1 day here in Connecticut. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thornton, for that. I have here from Olivier a question for Stephanie. He's asking, where are you based in the USA? So thank you, Stephanie.
Here at Conceivabilities, we are nationwide in the United States. We are headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. However, we have offices located across the country to facilitate with this process. So, but our headquarters are in Chicago.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that. Let's see if we have any more questions from Nadesh. Okay, we have a question. How long, on average, to find a gestational carrier? So this question is for Stephanie from Conceivabilities. Thank you, Stephanie.
On average, it takes approximately 3 to 6 months for an intended family to go through the matching process. However, it's very important to note that is time very well invested in our process. Here at Conceivabilities, we have a 95% success rate with the first presentation of a gestational carrier candidate. So what that means is once you're matched, that relationship moves forward, saving you time and money and an emotional investment because you only have to consider one candidate. You do not have to go through this matching process more than once. So the answer is, on average, it takes 3 to 6 months for us to match you with the best candidate for your family.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Okay. Do we have any more questions from the audience for any of the speakers? We're still waiting for Clelia Richard to get this technical problem resolved. Okay, Nicola. Okay, I understand that Nicola is asking for Stephanie if there is a selection process which is different, or if it's the same in cost for a twin pregnancy or a multiple pregnancy. So this question is for Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie.
And the answer is yes, there is a difference. If we know intended parents are interested in pursuing a multiple pregnancy, our job as your agency is to make sure that you are matched with a gestational carrier who is well educated and well prepared for the risks and responsibilities that go along with a multiple pregnancy. So it is always up to you and your team of physicians to decide what the best medical strategy is. So if it is agreed that you are going to pursue a multiple pregnancy, then our job is to make sure that we match you with a gestational carrier who is ready to meet the risks and responsibilities involved. The second part of that question was, what does that do to the cost? That is an excellent question. It adds to the estimate, the cost estimate necessary for a multiple pregnancy. On average, we tell families who are planning a single embryo transfer in hopes of a singleton pregnancy to expect approximately $130,000 to $150,000 in total costs. If you are planning for a double embryo transfer in hopes of a multiple pregnancy, it would be $150,000 to $170,000 in total costs. These are reasonable cost estimates for a multiple pregnancy. And again, if anybody wants more detailed information about the costs involved as well as the timeline involved, I invite you to schedule a consultation so that we can talk in more detail.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Dr. Thornton and Dr. DePino would like also to answer this question from the medical perspective. So, Dr. Thornton.
One of the things that is very, very important to understand is not only the selection of a particular gestational carrier, if the option really would be for a dual embryo transfer and the objective would be twins, to have a very good selection. And the selection can represent in the medical part, in the clinical part, cases where probably would not be as advisable for a woman that would go through a process that had, for example, too many previous cesarean sections. For example, there's other things that we want to make safe, which is in case that she becomes pregnant and she has indeed a twin pregnancy. And that's something that is very well thought out and cooperated between the agency, like the excellent agency that Stephanie has and works for, which is Conceivabilities, which is that partnership of trying to find the professionals, the obstetricians, and the institutions that would take upon that pregnancy in a safe way. We also will be very much monitoring, not only before, which we'll do a screening to her ourselves here in the clinic for a whole day, and we'll try to see all the contraindications or lesser of indications if that would be the case for a twin pregnancy. And also we will try to figure out what is the best strategy with the gestational carrier and complementary, of course, with the agency to try to figure out mechanisms in safety guards so that they're in place before things of medical field like prematurity, contractions, and other things that we know that are more common in twin pregnancies are already prepared for that safe journey that the gestational carrier needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. DePino. I would like to remind the speakers, please, to sit closer to their computer or microphone so that the sound quality is a little bit better. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to tell you that attorney Clelia Richard is finally resolved the technical problems and she is online. So I'm going to give her the floor. Thank you, Clelia.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for the invitation. I will try to give you a quick overview of the legal situation in terms of surrogacy in France and the legal problems which intended parents may face, either because you're considering this option or you're already involved in this process. As you can see, I have some slides prepared and they are displayed on the screen. And maybe my slides are slightly ambitious. I don't think we're going to have time to go through all of the material. It is a subject that we could speak for hours about, but I hope I will be as clear as possible and give you a good summary of the legal problems. So the title of my presentation is an update on French legislation for medically assisted procreation and surrogacy. Understanding that we are focused more this evening on surrogacy. So I had a plan for my presentation. I will not go through this exhaustively. I want to really highlight the most important point, namely how you, when you live with the family that you will create and with your babies, your children, the administrative problems which may arise regarding the civil status of your children. And on this first slide, I was just recalling that if medically assisted procreation is regulated in France, it is currently only for specific publics, so heterosexual couples who present medically observed fertility. Within medically assisted procreation techniques, the term surrogacy is not included because surrogacy, and I think that this is a reminder for the majority of you listening, surrogacy is not authorized in France. In fact, not only is it not authorized, it is prohibited, it is banned, both on a civil level and on a legal and a criminal level. There's specific legislation for this, which unfortunately is imposed on homosexual or any same-sex couples who wish to resort to surrogates in France. The civil status of a child born through surrogacy abroad and the patronage with his parents have led to a certain number of problems in certain cases. So I broke down into 6 points the topics to address and which must be addressed. And as I said, I don't think we're going to be able to go into each one of them in detail, but I will try to go over them briefly, and then I will follow your questions to give you any specific details if we've not managed to address some of the points. So there on this slide, I'm going to skip quite quickly through this one because, as I just said in my introduction, what must be remembered in terms of surrogacy plans is that it is strongly recommended that the individual programs be very closely monitored legally in France. There are forums, there are many websites with adverts which propose plans to be carried out in France, but let me remind you that it is prohibited legally. There can be criminal prosecution as a result, and so in the surrogacy, these wild surrogacy contracts, there have been a whole host of problems, including the child being taken from the intended parents or issues with the financial compensation. So to avoid problems, it is a real problem, and it can lead to criminal prosecution. So it is highly recommended with these plans either carry them out in the United States abroad and do a French legal monitoring of the case. And once again, on this slide, I don't want to go into too much detail. We know the main points in terms of medically assisted procreation or egg donation. It is permitted in France, but in quite a restrictive legislative framework. It is prohibited for homosexual couples, single women, or co-parenting, which would be a couple of homosexual men or a homosexual woman with a homosexual man who want to have a child together. So, once again, I'll skip through this quite quickly. Here, what is important is that civilly, even if it is signed abroad, the civil status contract, and is in compliance in the state where it is signed, this surrogacy contract does not exist in France. You cannot produce it before the courts. You cannot produce it as a civil status certificate. In certain authorities, and particularly there are courts to get the French national citizenship certificate, this is requested, but these contracts do not hold up in courts. This is an offence in France and can be sanctioned. That said, when these plans are implemented abroad, 100% abroad, signed abroad, and with the birth certificate abroad, there is a low likelihood or almost no likelihood that there will be criminal prosecution for technical reasons. I think you will understand this quite clearly. It is not possible. A French person can be prosecuted in France for an offence committed abroad if it was considered an offence abroad. So this is the condition of reciprocity. And in the countries where you will go to plan surrogacy, possibly the majority of you in the United States, not always, surrogacy is not considered an offence, and therefore there is a very low likelihood that you will be prosecuted criminally. Therefore, in conclusion to that section, or there's a summary here of what you must not do. So as I said, you should not implement these projects in France. It would be irresponsible. It will lead to inconsiderate risk in terms of the contract, and therefore, well, this is really the consequence of everything I've already said. You must not give up on your plans to form a family, but please do follow the advice of countries who can guide you in this process. So this is the core of the subject, and the topics which are addressed with your solicitors, which will guide you in the countries where you carry out the process, either for heterosexual or homosexual couples. Intended parents, there are always two parents. On most times, it's very rare when it's not the case. One parent is biologically linked to the child and the other one is not. So I will call the parent who is not biologically linked to the child the social parent. And let's be clear, they are both the intended parents, whether that is man or woman. But to be very clear about my presentation, which will follow, the major question is how the filiation bond between the parent and the child will be established, and that will have an impact on how the child is recognised on French territory. So this slide highlights that the civil status and nationality of the child born abroad through surrogacy is currently in the process of standardization. And I say standardization to highlight that there is a positive path at the moment in jurisprudence to standardize the status of these children. You are all very well aware of the Menacin and Labasse ruling, which were presented before the European Court of Human Rights on the 26th of June 2014, which condemned France. And France said that, and the court said that if the child is born through surrogacy, the child cannot be deprived of his rights and of his nationality. Of course, there were many interpretations of this ruling, but particularly in terms of the transcription of the filiation link between the child and the parent. Some of the surrogacy cases at abroad, this can no longer be an obstacle in terms of the nationality and the filiation bond of the child in France. An important ruling in the Court of Appeals 1 year later, 3rd of July 2015, in plenary assembly, which was the Boren ruling. The Boren ruling legally translated the Menacin ruling into the internal legal order. So this is an extremely important ruling. And there it was the Court of Appeal which almost copied and pasted the previous ruling text to say that whether it is surrogacy or not, that is not the problem. The child has the right to a civil status, and that should be drawn up, and the foreign birth certificate should be transcribed into the French civil registry if it complies with reality. In the Boren ruling, this was surrogacy which occurred in Russia, and the surrogate mother was or appears on the child's birth certificate. So the young boy in this case has a birth certificate with a mother and a father's name, and this meets the requirements of French law. After the Court of Appeal ruled. 4 months later, there was the transcription of the birth certificate of this boy in the French civil registry. So these were the two main points which have led us to feel more comfortable now on many topics in terms of the transcription of children's names born abroad into the civil register. So now moving on quickly, unless you have questions, but you can ask them later. I'll speak about the civil status. That can be the nationality, the filiation, the place of birth, the date of birth, the gender of the children. Maybe in some years that won't be the case, but it's still the case. And then the French citizenship certificate. What is that? That is a certificate which is granted by your place of residence. You are requested a piece of paper, and after meeting a series of criteria, you will be granted with this French citizenship certificate. It is mostly granted even when two fathers are mentioned on the birth certificate of the child. If two fathers are mentioned on the birth certificate and these two fathers are French, then the French citizenship certificate is granted without any problems, except if only one of the fathers is noted on the birth certificate, because that may seem like an anomaly, but it does make sense that under French law. The filiation bond, I think everyone is well aware of. The civil status in the United States compared with civil status in France. Just to quickly speak about that so that you understand it. Civil status of the child born through surrogacy in the United States will be established quite liberally. What does that mean? That means the intended parents are quite free to mention their child on the birth certificate as they wish. When there are two intended parents and the two signatories of the surrogacy contract, most logically, when the judge in the United States, it's a judge in the United States who will establish the birth certificate, while in France it is an administrative procedure. In the United States, it's a judiciary judge who will take the proof, the surrogacy contract, and will create the birth certificate either with two fathers or with one father, the biological father, or in some states, as far as I've understood, there can also figure, but that's quite rare. And there what's interesting is that the judge in the United States, and you must bear this in mind, the judge can firstly create a birth certificate with the biological father, and then secondly create a second birth certificate with the social parent, which I mentioned earlier, who adopts the biological child of their spouse, of the husband or wife if they're married. So that's the adoption of the spouse's child. So there are several possibilities for American judges in order to create the final birth certificate. The final birth certificate will mention both intended parents, but some will go through the spouse's adoption of the child, and this is in the United States. It's quite a quick process. It can take 3 weeks to 1 month, And of course, these are extra steps, so they will entail an additional cost, but it's very interesting. And let me tell you why. Because as we will see later on my slides, under this hypothesis alone, will the transcription of the birth certificate be possible? So we saw earlier what I already mentioned. So the major principles of the Ménocène-Labassé ruling from the European Court of Human Rights, I think that was quite clear. If you have any questions, then of course, feel free. But it's, as I said, for the European Courts of Human Rights, it was condemning France for having violated the European Convention of Human Rights, for having refusing to register a child born from surrogacy in the French civil status, and the case of the Boren case, where the young boy was born in Russia, applying the principle of internal law. The definitions and vocabulary, I think that the French citizenship certificate I've already mentioned, and civil status as well. I think paternal filiation everyone understands. The paternal biological filiation will always be recognized in France. The problem is the second paternal filiation. It will only be acknowledged if there is the adoption of the spouse's child. In terms of maternal filiation, in heterosexual women, couples who want to form a family abroad through surrogacy, it's going to be the same problem. And I was going to say it's even more difficult because under French law, maternal filiation is filiation which is based on the delivery of the baby. So we are not concerned with whether the egg belongs to the mother. Under French law, it is the mother who gives birth. So when the intended mother, the social parent, wants to be registered on the birth certificate as a mother, that will raise the question of the recognition of the filiation bond, which is a question in France. And that may be a bit shocking. These are very sensitive issues, I know, for any women who are forced to have their child carried by another woman. But in order to recognize that maternal filiation on French territory, we try that with foreign solicitors, and we often have to have the child adopted by the spouse on foreign territory because it's the only way to have the name transcribed on the birth certificate. The intended filiation everyone is aware of, and adoption, well, in France, as you know, there's simple adoption, there's plenary adoption, there's some differences. And my final point on this slide is extremely important, and it's the result of filiation. So beyond the symbolic note of wanting to be the parent of this expected and desired child, there are also consequences in terms of filiation, in terms of transmission of the name, of family property, of maintenance obligation, and civil liability for the child. The maintenance obligation is even when you don't live with the child, if you are their parent, you have a commitment to provide maintenance to that child. And once again, well, these are the major points in order to describe the civil status in the United States versus civil status in France. As I said, the birth certificate in the United States is created, established by a judge, and then the intended parents can get their civil status certificate. What is going to be difficult is transcribing this birth certificate, foreign birth certificate, in the French civil register. And this may be in two phases. Firstly, with the biological parent, and secondly, with the adoption process in the United States. The adoption process in the United States are very quick compared to what might occur in France. To summarize, in terms of birth certificates of children born through surrogacy abroad, and which can be transcribed without any problems in the French civil register, and what we find most often are the ones which comply with French law, and so these are hetero-named, so mother and father on the birth certificate. Then there are birth certificates which we see less frequently, where there's a maternal filiation, where the father has not recognized the child. And birth certificates, even less frequent but which do exist, are birth certificates with one single paternal filiation. And we see those if the father has recognized his child. Since the 17th of May 2013, there is a new law for marriage for all and adoption. Now, two same-sex parents can be on a birth certificate if this is the result of adoption of the spouse's child. The nationality of the child born by surrogacy. In general, in the United States, children will be American, if we take that example. They will have a passport, they will have American nationality, and that there will be no difficulties. So that's why I said along the way that there is no difficulty. You can travel without a visa between France and the United States, so return to France is no problem. Even if the child does not have any French papers, the process can be carried out on French soil. In order to obtain French nationality, and let me draw your attention to binational couples, you must bear in mind that French nationality is transferred through blood links. So if there are two fathers on a birth certificate, and this is a binational couple, for example, French and Belgian couple, the biological father, the father is Belgian, then in principle, you will not get a French citizenship certificate in that case, because the nationality is transferred through biological ties. So what I've just said is invalidated by what I'm going to say. The second way, if the biological parents and one is not French, if you adopt the spouse's child in the United States, then the transfer of nationality will be via a full adoption rights. However, in the United States, since there's no difference between simple and full adoption, then all adoption will have the same rights as full adoption, and so you will be able to have this transfer of nationality in this way. So adoption of the spouse's child in the States and in France. So coming back to the spouse's child adoption in the United States, well, I think we've spoken about that enough. I can answer any of your questions. However, there is also, you may have already heard about the hypothesis where only the biological father is noted on the birth certificate, and then they return in France with just one father mentioned on the American birth certificate, and then you proceed to the adoption of the child of the spouse in France. Maybe this is clear, but sometimes it's good to remember that to adopt the spouse's child, this must be from a married couple. The spouse must be part of a married couple. It's sad, but the law requires marriage of this couple, and so to adopt the child of the spouse, the marriage certificate must be presented in the case file for adoption. So you cannot agree to the adoption of a child who is not from a married couple. You must present the marriage certificate. This is a legal requirement. So to speak about some procedures which are currently in process in France for the adoption of the spouse's child. For many, it's gone very well, even if there's been difficult episodes. Everything has been resolved now and things work well. It does take time. It can be 8, 10 months, 6 months, depending on the courts. In double filiation couples, the procedures are underway. There's 3 jurisdictions, Paris, La Rochelle, Bayonne, which have pronounced these adoptions. However, the rulings are not all definitive yet because the Court of the Republic has appealed some of these rulings. But let me give you a summary because I don't want to take up too much time. It works in France. The adoption of the spouse's child in same-sex couples. This is not easy, it's not immediate, but I would say that I'm very hopeful. Although the legal arsenal has not changed, there's still politics which will intervene in the coming months. There's no reason to question this route. Why should we prioritize adoption of the child in the United States? 1, because it's possible. 2, it is faster. 3, you get the certificate. You will get your French certificate. It will be recognized by the French courts. So there's a safeguard by adoption in the United States. So this is just what I've said. This number 6 is a summary. It's important because it's the only way of really safeguarding the child within his family. This does not mean that any couple, either heterosexual or homosexual couples of 2 men who have had registered on the birth certificate ab initio, so before any adoption of the spouse's child process, it's not a lost cause at all. I'm not trying to be alarmist for those cases because there are several solutions possible. It's not just patching something together. There can be other solutions. I don't think I have time to go into all of this. That's a legal issue which exists for those cases. But what I'm trying to present is the optimal situation in terms of safeguarding your future child or your child within your family.
Thank you very much, Clelia, for that very thorough exposition of the situation in France from a legal perspective. Now we still have a few minutes left where we can take some questions from the public for any of the speakers. And we already have 2 questions. So I can see here from Nicolas. Okay, so this is a question for Clelia. So I'm going to give the floor to Clelia again. Thank you, Clelia.
Clelia. Yes, thank you for these questions. If you are in the US, certain states allow you to adopt your spouse's child, so you don't have to be married. I had this case, an homosexual couple created this affiliation bond without being married, and they asked me to transcribe the act. But then I asked them to get married, because if we follow the legal process when it comes to transcription, we have to abide by the Taubira law. So in any case, at some point you'll have to get married if you want your birth certificate to be transcribed. But in the US, this is not a requirement in some states. Right. The next question, will it change with Mr. Fillon? So, to answer your question, Juan, so let's hypothetically have this situation where Mr. Fillon is elected and implement his reforms. So let's imagine that he wants to overhaul the adoption law. You all saw the debate between Mr. Juppé and Mr. Fillon, and one of them said, I won't change anything, so we will only do simple adoption and not full adoption when it comes to the second father or to the second mother. So they haven't mentioned at all the case of same-sex couples or intended mothers for whom the filiation bond is a problem. So let's imagine that this is a priority in their agenda. I think that there will be a constitutional problem. Why? Well, because if in the Taubira law and if same-sex couple or those who went for surrogacy are eligible for simple adoption, this wouldn't be acceptable legally. But as you know, there is a movement with François Fillon called Sens Commun, and they have a number of opinions and ideas to decide to scrap the Taubira law or to minimize its effects. So, as I said, I think this is a shame to be forced to get married, to be able to adopt the biological child of the spouse. So, this is a problem for me, but actually what will save these couples is the fact that marriage between same-sex couple is accepted, is now legal, and this way it's going to be a form of protection, because now that homosexuals are part of this category, it's going to be very hard without breaching the Constitution or the Convention on Human Rights. It's going to be difficult to...
Thank you, Clelia. Nadesh is asking how long do we have to foresee to stay in the territory, meaning I think she means in the USA, to do the paperwork or the adoption after the birth of the child. So I'm going to give this answer to Stephanie from Conceivabilities, who will be able to answer this question. Thank you very much, Stephanie.
I want to make sure I understand the question, Juan. Is the question, how long do intended parents stay after birth to establish parentage? Is that correct?
Yes, Stephanie, that is correct, for all the paperwork after the birth of the child.
That varies, but the longest we've seen intended parents stay is approximately 3 to 4 weeks, and it wasn't due to the paperwork. It was due to concerns from the physician about traveling with the child so soon. So essentially, the paperwork is driven at the state level here in the United States. So dependent on what state the baby is born, there is different paperwork paths to establishing parenthood. In some instances, it's done pre-birth order. So that paperwork is done before the child is even born. In other instances, there may be a court appearance that happens directly after birth, so within a few days' time. And then dependent on what paperwork is necessary for the French consulate for returning home for the passport, there is the last piece that takes time. So the answer is it varies. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we always individualize a strategy for intended parents when we start the program. So as we learn more about the intended parents, whether they are in a heterosexual married relationship or a same-sex committed relationship or as a single parent, there are different pathways in different states that are most appropriate to protecting their parenting rights. As we meet and learn more about them, we will customize the strategy and make sure that they learn as much as possible about the legal process here in the United States before we even get started with embryo transfer. So essentially the answer is a couple weeks at most, but we will have very concrete answers to those questions as we go through the early part of our process.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. There is one question from Olivier, and this question is after the return from the USA, so into France, when do we have to ask for the documents of identity of the child, and if there is any towns which are more understanding than others in France? So this question is for Clélia. Thank you, Clélia.
Qui sont plus flexibles que d'autres. La question, elle est posée à Clélia. Vous avez la parole. Yes, so regarding French documents, identity documents, you have to make a request at the French consulate first. If you have a birth certificate with two fathers mentioned on it, directly inscribed without having to do the adoption, well, you don't need to ask for a transcription at the consulate because it won't work. So the consulate is where this happens, but then the consulate forwards this request to the civil registry in Nantes. So it's a rather complicated process. So sometimes it's Nantes, sometimes it's the consulates. So the best way, I think, is to make this request to both. Then you don't have a town that is more lenient than the other, but regarding certain jurisdictions, you'll have differences. So in Paris, nationality certificates are quite delivered quite easily, but then in other towns like Toulouse, it's a bit more complicated. So it depends on who is in charge in the tribunal. So it's a bit hard to answer this question. If there is a problem, for example, in the Toulouse tribunal, the person responsible for this case is away, then maybe if this person changes, it's going to be easier. So, sorry Juan, I'm also answering the next question. When in the case of twins with two fathers, and if we don't want to know who the biological parent is, I had this situation many times. Some fathers didn't want to know who was the biological father. So in this case, there is a very simple solution. If the two fathers are both French, and if their nationality is clearly established, in this case, it's going to be easy to get a nationality certificate. If you want, in this situation, to adopt the child to have the second filiation bond in the US, well, in this case, you have a number of solutions. You can decide who is the biological father, and then the other one adopts the child. In France, you won't need genetic tests. The biological father and the father who declares that he is the biological father will be the biological father in France.
Thank you very much, Delia. I think that was very well answered. We have maybe 1 or 2 minutes left maximum to finalize with the questions. Otherwise, you have on the screen all the contact details for all the speakers. This webinar has been recorded and it will be available for you. I will be sending you on your individual emails the link to access this webinar, where you can watch it some other time. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to finish this webinar. I would like to thank very much to all the speakers tonight and to all the participants. It's been a great session, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you very much.